The light rain pattered against the windshield. A typical Thursday night in downtown Philadelphia. I was Amara Price, 42, a black woman who'd spent the last 15 years climbing the ranks in state oversight. I'd just left an internal meeting at the Pennsylvania State Capitol building, discussing police conduct policies, the kind of work that kept me up late, but fueled my purpose. Dressed in my charcoal coat, hair neatly bunned, my black leather bag sat on the passenger seat. My sedan, an old but spotless Toyota Camry, rolled slowly through the center city streets, headlights cutting through the misty glow of street lamps. The meeting had run long, as usual, debating reforms for bias training. I wasn't complaining. As the newly appointed Director of State Internal Oversight for Law Enforcement, these were the battles I chose. My mind wandered to the report due tomorrow, cases of unchecked power that reminded me why I fought. The radio hummed low with jazz, drowning out the city's hum. At the quiet intersection of 8th and Roosevelt, the light turned yellow just as I approached. I eased through, but sirens wailed behind me. I checked the rear view, a patrol car flashing blue and red. I pulled over immediately, killed the engine, lowered the window, and kept my hands on the wheel. An officer approached, tall, muscular, white, his face stern under the streetlight. His name tag read, Wade Carter. I need you to turn off the engine, roll down all windows, and step out of the vehicle. I complied calmly, stepping into the drizzle. What's going on, officer? You were speeding and you look like you're hiding something. I frowned slightly. I'm not carrying anything illegal. I just left a state office. I'm checking your bag. Excuse me, do you have a warrant? I asked evenly. Carter didn't answer. He reached past me, opened the passenger door, grabbed my bag, and set it on his cruiser's hood. If you've got nothing wrong, you won't mind. I met his eyes, silent. The rain intensified, but I stood still, the conflict crashing in like the storm. Officer Jalen Banks, the younger partner, driving the patrol car, stepped out to assist, his face a mix of hesitation and duty. He glanced at me, but said nothing as Carter barked louder, his voice echoing off the wet buildings. We can hold you for 48 hours without charges, so cooperate. I stood tall, hands at my sides, rain trickling down my coat. Carter didn't wait. He unzipped my bag roughly, dumping contents onto the cruiser's hood, my wallet, keys, a notepad. Then he pulled out the leather portfolio. Flipping it open, his eyes widened, then narrowed. The federal badge gleamed under the streetlight, pinned to my commission letter with the state seal and governor's signature. What the hell is this? Carter muttered. Stepping back like it burned him, Banks leaned in, reading quickly, then snapped to attention out of reflex old military habit. Maybe. But Carter recovered fast, slamming the portfolio shut. This could be fake. I've seen plenty of forgeries. You think flashing some badge makes you untouchable? His tone turned vicious, public now, as if performing for an invisible audience. People like you always play the card dressed up, acting superior but hiding something. Black woman in a nice coat. I've pulled knives, drugs from respectable types, just like you. Don't try your act on me. The words stung deeper than the rain. My dignity shredded right there on the street. Not just the search, but the assumption that my skin made me suspect. Cars slowed, drivers gawking. A couple across the road whispered, "Phone's out." No one intervened. I was a state director, overseeing the very system he abused. But in that moment, I was just people like you, reduced, humiliated. Banks shifted uncomfortably. Sir, maybe we should verify. Shut it, Carter snapped. shoving the portfolio back into my bag. "You're coming to the station. Try calling a lawyer. See if they believe your story." I felt the burn in my cheeks, the public shame settling like lead. Rain soaked my hair, but I didn't move. My work fought this exact bias, yet here I was, living it. The insult wasn't just words. It was the erasure of who I was. I didn't need to say another word. The rain continued its steady drum on the pavement, soaking through my coat as I stood there, unflinching. Carter's face twisted with a mix of confusion and defiance after flipping open my portfolio, the federal badge staring back at him like an accusation. Banks hovered nearby, his youthful uncertainty cracking through his uniform's facade. But I gave them nothing, no outburst, no pleas. Silence was my response, a quiet force they'd underestimate at their peril. Slowly, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers moved deliberately across the screen, opening the Contacts app. I tapped the single entry labeled Commissioner Nadia Lawson Direct. I pressed it to my ear, eyes locked on the two officers, unblinking. "Hello, Commissioner Lawson," I said evenly, my voice cutting through the drizzle. "It seems our training protocols need an update on Section 17, racial bias and discretionary stops." A pause as she responded. "I'm at the intersection of 8th and Roosevelt, and I believe we need to replace the entire night shift personnel here immediately." I ended the call with a soft click, slipping the phone back into my pocket. No frown creased my face, no shout escaped my lips. I simply stood there, rain tracing cold paths down my skin, letting the weight of what I'd set in motion settle over them. Carter stepped back, hand twitching toward his radio, his earlier bravado crumbling. "What the? You can't just..." But he trailed off, words failing under my gaze. Banks lowered his head, avoiding my eyes altogether. I didn't move, didn't explain. The silence I offered was heavier than any reprimand, a chokehold on their assumptions. In that moment, as the rain blurred the streetlights, my eyes met Carter's, one last time, not with anger, but with a steady, piercing calm that stripped away his illusions of power. It was a look that said everything. "You've misjudged, and now you'll learn." The quiet stretched, broken only by distant sirens, perhaps the first wave of consequences approaching. They stood frozen, the air thick with their dawning regret. After my brief phone call, Officer Wade Carter hastily shoved the badge and documents back into my bag, his hands visibly shaking. He zipped it shut with too much force, as if trying to erase what he'd seen. Jalen Banks, the younger partner, exhaled heavily, his face paling. "Sir, this looks like a big deal," Banks whispered, glancing between me and Carter. "Shut up," Carter snarled, his voice low but sharp. He fumbled for his radio, keying it with a click. "Dispatch, run a verification on female driver Amara Price. Note, possible forged federal credentials." The dispatch crackled back. "You said federal badge? Did she present documentation?" "I suspect it's fake," Carter replied, his tone wavering but defiant. Banks shot me a quick look. I stood leaning against my car, phone still in hand, silent. Across the street, a few pedestrians had noticed the scene. A black woman in her 30s pulled out her phone, starting to record from afar, murmuring to her companion, "Looks like she's not backing down. Bet that's real. Cops always assume the worst." The atmosphere thickened like the rain. A bus driver slowed his vehicle, lowering the window to peer out. "Cops at it again," he muttered, loud enough for us to hear, shaking his head before driving on. The comment hung in the air, fueling the tension. Carter turned to Banks. "What are you standing there for? Write up the report, say she resisted the search." But, sir, she didn't resist. Banks hesitated, his voice trailing. Do as ordered, Carter barked, his face reddening. The pedestrians' whispers grew. One man joined the woman filming, saying, "This is messed up. She's just standing there, and he's acting like she's a criminal." I didn't intervene. I let their actions build the case against them, my silence amplifying every misstep. I stepped closer to my opened bag on the cruiser's hood, the rain still drizzling down in a steady patter. Calmly, I zipped it shut, pulling the strap smooth with deliberate care. "I think you're venturing far beyond your authorized limits," I said softly, my voice even, no edge to it. Carter's face reddened, his hand clenching into a fist at his side. "Don't lecture me, lady. I have every right to search if I suspect something." I tilted my head slightly, allowing a faint smile, polite, not mocking. "What a pity. Because I'm the one who revised Section 7.2 on warrantless search authority, the very clause you've just violated, all 3 subsections." I didn't raise my voice, didn't insult, just stated the facts, plain and precise. Banks swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Where do you work, ma'am?" "I'm the newly appointed Director of State Internal Oversight for Law Enforcement," I replied. "In a few weeks, I might even be teaching the retraining course for your entire patrol division." Carter's knuckles whitened, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal seeking escape. But there was no backup now, no dispatch voice to affirm him, no partner to echo his bluster. Banks shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the radio as if it might save them. The rain picked up, drumming harder on the cars. But I stood unmoved. My words hung there, a gentle nudge that exposed their overreach without a fight. Carter opened his mouth, then closed it, the authority he'd wielded so freely now crumbling under the weight of his own actions. From afar, a sleek black SUV approached, its tires slicing through the puddles with barely a sound. No state markings on the plates, just dark-tinted windows and an aura of authority that made the rain seem to part around it. It screeched to a halt curbside, headlights cutting through the mist like knives. A white woman in her 30s stepped out, clutching a digital tablet, striding directly toward us with purposeful steps. She wore a crisp blazer, hair pulled back tight, unfazed by the downpour. "Director Price," she said, voice clipped and professional. "I'm the direct aide from Commissioner Nadia Lawson's office. We've received the alert through the emergency channel. The entire incident is being recorded from our vehicle per protocol." Carter backed up a step, his hand dropping limp like he'd been struck. Banks bowed his head low, realization dawning that he was caught in a political storm, and the eye of it was the black woman they'd dismissed as suspicious. The aide tapped her tablet, a small red light blinking to life on the SUV's dash cam. Full audio and visual capture initiated. Commissioner Lawson is looped in real time. Carter's face drained of color, his earlier defiance crumbling. "What? Who the hell?" I didn't turn to look at them. I simply said one sentence short, but cold to the bone. "When true power speaks, those who abuse it find no ground left to stand on." Even with the federal aide on scene, her body cam blinking red, Officer Wade Carter refused to back down. He straightened his shoulders, rain dripping from his cap, and turned to me with a forced sneer. "I don't care who you are," he said, voice rising to carry over the downpour. "Your uncooperative attitude is still an issue. You'll get a citation and—" "And what, officer?" I interrupted calmly, my eyes steady. "I'll request to detain you for further investigation on suspected credential forgery," he replied, his tone shaky but defiant. The aide from Lawson's office pulled out a small device, pressing a button. Her body cam whirred louder. I'm documenting threats against a federal official, abuse of authority in a warrantless search, and fabricating administrative reasons after misidentifying a citizen. Jalen Banks, the young partner, stood frozen, eyes wide and reddening. He was realizing there was no escape if he stayed silent. Carter spun to him. What are you doing? Call for backup. This is a conspiracy against law enforcement. Banks hesitated, then keyed his radio, voice trembling. Dispatch. Request additional units to 8th and Roosevelt. Possible resistance from a suspect claiming federal status. The aide tapped her tablet. Noted. That's escalation without cause. Added to the report. Carter's face flushed deeper red. He grabbed my bag again, as if to research it. You think a phone call changes anything? I've dealt with important people before. You're still getting processed. I didn't move, letting his actions dig his grave deeper. Rain pounded harder, but the tension peaked, his desperation, turning a simple stop into a full-blown standoff. Banks whispered, Sir, we should stop. Follow orders, Carter barked, his hand hovering near his holster, amplifying the threat. He was cornered, lashing out, unaware the system he'd abused was now turning on him. From the sidelines, the crowd began to swell, rain-slicked faces peering from under umbrellas and hoods. At first, it was just curious onlookers, a few pedestrians pausing mid-stride, phones emerging from pockets. One man, mid-30s, with a backpack, started live streaming, his voice hushed but urgent. Looks like she's got some rank. That cop's about to get canned. An elderly black woman clutched her handbag tighter on the opposite sidewalk, her eyes shifting from sympathy to quiet pride as she watched me stand unmoved. That girl, she ain't yelling, but she's making the whole street hold its breath, she murmured to a companion, her words carrying over the patter of rain. The whispers spread like ripples, doubt seeding in the air. A young couple nearby exchanged glances. If she's federal, why is he still pushing? This is messed up. Phones multiplied, capturing Carter's escalating bluster, his hand hovering near his radio as if calling for backup would save him. Then another patrol car pulled up, lights flashing blue through the mist. An internal affairs supervisor stepped out, older, stern-faced, uniform impeccable. He spotted me immediately and snapped to attention with a salute. Director Price, we've received the report. Apologies for the delay. Carter swallowed hard, his defiance cracking visibly. He'd never seen one cop salute the woman he'd just tried to search minutes ago. Banks lowered his head further, avoiding eye contact. The crowd's energy shifted murmurs, turning to open speculation. The live streamer zoomed in. Holy shit, she's the boss. This guy's done. The elderly woman nodded approvingly, her pride swelling. Even the rain seemed to pause, the street holding collective breath as outsiders pieced it together. This wasn't just a stop gone wrong. It was a reckoning. I didn't acknowledge the growing doubt. I let it build, my silence fueling their questions. Carter's face paled. He was cornered now, his aggression exposed under the gathering scrutiny. I pulled out my phone again, switching it to speaker mode under the relentless rain. My fingers moved with practiced calm, dialing the direct line. A female voice answered promptly. This is Commissioner Nadia Lawson's office. This is Amara Price, I said, my tone measured. I request activation of the Emergency Investigation Protocol under Section 41.6 for abuse of authority, targeting Officer Wade Carter and all actions tonight. Freeze all related record access for federal review. Acknowledged. Protocol initiating in 6 minutes. I ended the call, and turned to Carter and Banks, rain streaming down my face, but my voice steady as a stone. I won't arrest you. I'll let the justice system do that. And when the law speaks, every misused badge becomes evidence against you. The words hung there, simple but seismic. The street went utterly silent. No more radio crackles, no pedestrian whispers. Carter's defiance shattered. He stepped back, face ashen, hand dropping from his radio like it burned him. Banks bowed his head deeper, shoulders slumping in defeat. The aide from Lawson's office nodded once, her tablet already updating in real time. Full lockdown confirmed. Backup teams en route. Carter stammered, You can't. But he stopped, words failing as sirens wailed in the distance. Not his backup, but mine. The doubt that had simmered now boiled over. The arriving internal affairs vehicle screeched to a halt, doors flying open with officials in suits, badges flashing federal authority. One approached Carter directly. Hand over your weapon and badge. You're on immediate suspension. He complied, hands trembling, the clatter of metal on the hood echoing his collapse. Banks followed suit, whispering apologies under his breath. In that single sentence, I'd flipped the script not with fury, but with the quiet weight of procedure. The rain eased slightly, as if the night itself exhaled. I stood there, soaked but unbroken, watching the system I'd helped build finally turn on its own rot. Exactly 6 minutes after my call, a convoy from the State Internal Oversight Commission rolled up black SUVs with tinted windows. No sirens, but their presence hit like thunder. Leading was the chief internal inspector for the state, flanked by 2 investigators in gold-badged vests. They didn't acknowledge me, didn't debate, just marched straight to Officer Wade Carter. Hands on their clipboards like weapons. Hand over your firearm and badge, the chief said flatly. You're on immediate suspension, pending investigation. What? Hold on, I was just following procedure. Carter yelped, his voice cracking, face twisting in panic. We have full evidence of your unlawful search, fabricated administrative cause, and deliberate disregard for identity verification, the chief replied, unmoved. Jalen Banks stammered forward. I was just following my superior. I didn't participate in the search. One investigator glanced his way. You're a witness, but tamper with your statement, and you'll be the next defendant. The scene froze like a courtroom in recess. Rain still fell, but the street hushed. No more radio chatter, no pedestrian murmurs. A bystander live streaming whispered into his mic. I've never seen cops stripped of their badges right on the street by a black woman. I stood there, coat soaked, watching it unfold. This wasn't vengeance. It was the system I'd helped build, finally enforcing itself. Carter fumbled his belt, handing over his gun with trembling hands, his authority crumbling like wet paper. Banks followed suit, head bowed low. The chief turned to me briefly. Director Price, we'll need your formal statement, but protocol's active. Thank you for handling it by the book. I nodded once. No smile, just the quiet satisfaction of power, arriving not with force, but with inevitability. The internal affairs chief leaned forward, his voice tentative amid the tense silence of the room. Miss Price, do you have the authority to launch a full system investigation on local grounds like this? I placed the authorization order on the table deliberately, the federal seal catching the light from the overhead fluorescents. I am the senior coordinator for the Federal Commission on Police Conduct Oversight, and this incident has breached every threshold this morning. I turned to the federal attorney beside me, giving a subtle nod. Effective immediately, The entire night shift for this precinct is suspended pending review of stop procedures, searches, and reporting. Any officer with a record of racial bias will face mandatory retraining or removal from active duty. The room stiffened. No interruptions came. A young city lawyer tried, his tone hesitant. This event, it could just be a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can, I raised a hand, cutting him off without elevating my voice. A woman searched without warrant for driving while black. You call that a misunderstanding? I paused, my gaze sweeping the table. If I weren't who I am, this meeting might not even exist. Carter slumped in his chair, head bowed. Banks stood motionless, his earlier uncertainty now frozen in regret. All eyes turned to me, not as a victim, but as the architect resetting the balance. The news broke like wildfire. Headlines flashed on phones around the table. Black woman stopped by cops, turns out she's state oversight director. One illegal search, and a career crumbles in 30 seconds. Reporters outside clamored. One who'd slipped in thrust a mic forward. Excuse me, ma'am, can you confirm your name and title for the record? I faced him squarely. I am Amara Price, Director of Investigations for the Federal Commission on Police Conduct Oversight. I'm not here for interviews. I'm here to work. The room's energy shifted irrevocably, my identity now official. The tide turning from doubt to deference. Carter's hands trembled. He knew his world had ended. I felt no triumph, only resolve. This wasn't personal victory. It was the system bending toward justice, one revelation at a time. Wade Carter was led toward the investigation van, his steps faltering like a man walking to his own execution. As he passed me, rain still dripping from his cap, he opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, to beg, or to spit one last defiant word. But my gaze met his, steady and unyielding, and whatever he intended dissolved into nothing. He closed his mouth, shoulders slumping further, the fight drained from him in an instant. If I weren't who I am, I said softly, my voice barely above the patter of rain, this night would have ended in bruises, or worse, a memorial plaque. No one responded. The words hung there, a quiet indictment, not just of him, but of the system that enabled his arrogance. Carter's face crumpled, the color leaching away as the reality hit. His career built on unchecked power, on stops like this one, shattered right there on the wet pavement. One of the investigators bowed his head slightly toward me. We'll take all the evidence from here. Thank you for handling this with such restraint, Director. I didn't nod, didn't offer more words. I simply glanced at his name tag, committing it to memory as a reminder that even in victory, justice needed allies to keep it alive. Carter collapsed fully then, not physically, but in spirit. He handed over his radio without protest, eyes glassy, as they cuffed him for processing. His partner, Banks, watched in stunned silence, his own future now tainted by association. The scene unfolded like a slow unraveling. Flashlights cutting through the mist, officials murmuring into earpieces, the aide from Lawson's office logging every detail on her tablet. Carter muttered something incoherent as they guided him into the van. Perhaps a plea, perhaps denial, but it didn't matter. He was done, stripped of the badge that had been his shield for too long. I stood there, coat heavy with rain, feeling no rush of triumph, only the quiet resolve of necessity. This wasn't about one man's fall. It was the crack in a flawed foundation, widening with every drop of water. The morning after, I left the state inspector's headquarters in downtown Philadelphia. The building's glass facade reflecting a pale sun that had finally broken through the clouds. I wasn't in my usual suit today, no crisp blazer, no tie. It was a rare day off after 4 grueling weeks of nonstop work, and I chose jeans, a simple sweater, and my old wool coat. My hair was down, loose curls, framing my face, a small act of reclaiming normalcy after the storm. I drove back to the intersection at 8th and Roosevelt, not out of masochism, but because it was on my way home, and I refused to detour around my own life. The site where I'd been stopped and searched now bore a yellow caution tape stretched across the curb. Under internal investigation, do not approach. Police barriers cordoned off the spot, a few evidence markers still scattered like forgotten confetti from the night's chaos. I parked legally this time, stepped out, and stood there for a few seconds. Rain from last night had left puddles mirroring the sky. I didn't peer inside the tape, didn't snap a photo for posterity. I simply walked slowly past it, head high, steps measured, no bowing, no glancing back. The sidewalk felt different under my boots, firmer, as if the ground itself acknowledged the shift. A delivery truck rumbled by, slowing at the light. The driver, a young black man in his 20s, cap pulled low, glanced out his window, our eyes meeting briefly. He didn't speak, just touched 2 fingers to his forehead. In a silent salute, a nod of recognition. Then he drove on. I didn't respond outwardly, but my steps lightened as I crossed the street. No one needs to know who I am, I whispered to myself, the words dissolving in the morning air. As long as they no longer dare treat people like me as if we're no one at all. 2 days later, a small post appeared on an online forum for retired police officers, one of those anonymous spaces where ex-cops vent about the job. I was scrolling through my secure tablet at home, monitoring the fallout from that night, when it caught my eye. The title was simple: What I Saw in the Wade Carter Case. The anonymous writer laid it out raw. I used to work alongside Wade Carter. I knew his temper, and I know that if that woman hadn't had her badge that night, she'd have been locked up, humiliated, maybe worse. I'm not writing this to defend him. I'm writing to question myself. How many other nameless folks didn't get her luck? How many bags got rifled through? How many heads had guns jammed against them with no camera rolling? If I'd been there that day, would I have had the guts to say, "Stop, this is wrong"? The post exploded, shared over 12,000 times in the first 24 hours. Comments flooded in, some defensive, others confessional, a few outright supportive. No one knew the author, maybe a former partner, a disillusioned rookie who'd quit, or just someone haunted by the job's shadows. But whoever it was, their words hit like a mirror, held up to the system I'd spent years trying to fix. I read it twice, sitting in my quiet living room, rain tapping the window again like an echo of that night. It wasn't about me, not really. It was the ripple, one voice admitting the cracks, forcing others to look. I didn't respond on the forum. That wasn't my role. But I saved the screenshot, adding it to my case file. Proof that change didn't always come from the top. Sometimes it started in the quiet regrets of those who'd been part of the problem. Mom called later that evening. Saw the post online, she said. People are waking up. Yeah, I replied softly. But it's just one. We need 1,000 more. She paused. You started the chain, Amara. That's enough for now. I hung up, staring at the screen. The aftershocks from that rainy stop were still spreading through forums, headlines, maybe even hearts. And in that anonymous confession, I saw hope. Justice didn't need names. It just needed enough people to keep it alive. 1 week later, the governor's announcement echoed through the state capitol press room in Harrisburg, a grand space with high ceilings and rows of reporters scribbling notes under bright lights. The new initiative, Rapid Assessment Program for Civil Rights Violations, a pilot in 7 cities aimed at real-time reviews of police stops. And the direct advisor named me, Amara Price. I stood at the podium, no notes, just the quiet resolve I'd carried since that rainy night. The room buzzed with flashes and murmurs. My face had been all over the news headlines, like Oversight Director turns tables on rogue cop. But I wasn't here for the spotlight. I was here to cement the change. A reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer raised his hand, mic thrust forward. Miss Price, what made you choose such calm restraint that night, instead of a more aggressive condemnation like we've seen in other cases? The room hushed. I paused, letting the silence build, rain from outside tapping faintly on the windows like a reminder of that intersection. Then I leaned into the mic, voice steady. Because I don't need to shout to prove my worth. I just need to stand still and let those who think they hold power realize how wrongly they've used it. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment. Behind me, a small banner read, "Justice doesn't need anger, it just needs presence." The words hung there, rippling through the crowd. No applause followed, just thoughtful nods, pens scratching faster. The governor shook my hand afterward, but I felt the real impact in the quiet. Reporters exchanging glances, one whispering, "That's going viral." As I stepped off the stage, coat over my arm, I walked out into the light rain again. No detours this time. The program wasn't just policy, it was proof that one stand could reshape the rules. And in that captured image, frozen on screens across the state, I saw not victory, but a blueprint for every woman like me, every stop that shouldn't happen. The rain eased as I drove away, the city blurring behind me. Presence, that's all it took.